Hello and welcome to Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey. Today we're talking about Andor. I'm joined by my old pal Eammon Jacobs to talk about their Star Wars show. We go over that, but we also go over a little bit of Tales of the Jedi as well. And yeah, spoiler alert, both of them good. Hey, if you enjoy these videos, the episodes of the podcast, the trailer reactions, the handful of essays I've done as well, please like them, subscribe to the channel. The podcast you can also get on an audio only feed if you enjoy it that way more. So yeah, now let's get to Andor. Eammon, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again. I am the Star Wars guy now.
Yes, it is helpful that I have reliable people for specific things. And this won't matter for you, but this episode's going up on Thanksgiving. So
nice.
Yeah, doesn't make it. I mean, if anything, maybe you would take offense to it, but yeah.
No, I'm not offended. Don't worry.
Well, we are going to talk about Andor. I do want to actually ask you real quick, because I didn't get to cover this. What did you think about Tales of the Jedi real quick?
I thought it was a little bit disjointed. Overall, really enjoyed it. But yeah, I thought it sort of sagged in the middle ever so slightly. With Alan Rickman, Count Dooku. But I thought the ending in particular, I really, really loved, just because it was a really like self-contained story, and I'm a sucker for just like a fun, simple in and out adventure.
Yeah.
And that Inquisitor design was just like gorgeous. Like it was really, really cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it's like a sort of proto Clone Wars sequel type thing. I thought it was a really fun experiment. And yeah, the Dooku stuff was interesting, but like I say, in the middle it just sort of sagged a bit. But kudos for bringing Yaddle back. That was good.
Bryce Dallas Howard too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I think I maybe liked it even a little bit more, but I agree that it was like the episode placement is why that happened. I think they should have just done it in probably chunks of, here's the Ahsoka ones, here's the like Dooku ones, and I think that probably would have helped, instead of like bookending with Ahsoka and then like squeezing everything else into what 2, 3, and 4. So yeah,
yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I particularly loved the Ahsoka stuff, which is 99% of the time that is the case at this point. But yeah, the way that they set up, and by the way, in the first episode with the Ahsoka stuff, with Janina doing the her mom, it's just like every time Janina is in a Star Wars, it's awesome. I love it. She's fantastic. But the that finale episode that does the literal, not just a callback, but the literal like moment from Clone Wars again, like it hits so well. It hits so good.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm glad.
And I really liked that they didn't just like do the finale of Clone Wars again. I thought the way that they ended it with them just going into the hangar was really effective, because we already know what happens, but it just felt even more dramatic somehow just leaving it there. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, it's the poetry of what got there. And that's, I'm going to get to a lot of like discussion of more like direct versus kind of painterly and poetry version of things going forward in the discussion of Andor. So let's get into Andor. Just what your no spoiler top level kind of reaction to what Andor is.
In terms of no spoilers, I thought, I'll be honest, to begin with, I was quite disappointed. I thought the slow burn just wasn't quite what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be a little bit more pacey to begin with, and it wasn't. But after about sort of an episode and a half of settling into what Tony Gilroy was showing us, I was like, oh, I can see where this is going now. Like, I can understand the reason for building it out this way. And as it started to go on, and particularly towards Aldhani, the prison, it just blew my socks off completely. And I would No hyperbole aside, I think it's my favorite TV show of the year, quite frankly, and I think that's the case for a lot of people, just because of the sheer emotion that Gilroy has woven into this story, and it's just mind blowing. Actually, quite frankly, that of all the Star Wars projects announced over the last few years, this was probably the one I was least excited for, quite frankly. Even though Rogue One is fantastic, I just didn't really get on board with this idea, and I just think it's quite funny that I'm the other side of it, and I'm just like, holy hell, that was brilliant.
Yeah.
Give me more.
Yeah, I think I have some similar thoughts about it as you. I like that they basically did a supersized episode to premiere it. It probably should have been 2 episodes instead of 3, just for the terms of like, you could do an hour and 10 to 15 minute 2 episodes, and it probably would have flowed a little bit better. But I also wasn't against it in the fact that like it's going into it, we did know that it was going to be a tension builder, and so I think you kind of have to start at a point that is like a little bit more calm, to give the viewer a little more comfort level. So it's going to be that slow burn of just like, all right, you're sitting on the couch and sitting with a blanket over your lap and like getting comfortable now, and then we're gonna rip that away. So they kind of like, they managed to work that out a bit. And yeah, I think that this show is proof that like there's differing levels of like quality with Star Wars stuff, right? And there's these things where I think it comes down to belief in what's being made, where it's like making a thing to make a thing, or making a thing because you have a story and a message you want to get across. And that's like, the former was how we got Book of Boba Fett, where it's just like, let's just make this thing, it'll be fun, which is, that's fine, you can do that, but like, I want to see a little bit more of this. And by that I mean not just more Andor, not more Rogue One, where it's like the gritty kind of like down to earth version of things, but like just the fact that like you can tell the creative team on this show gave a shit about it. Like they cared so much about this that they didn't want to get anything wrong. Like nobody wants to get anything wrong, but like they wanted to really convey the passion with the product. And I think that Star Wars does that sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. And that goes for TV shows and in movies, because like I think that comes across with The Force Awakens when they're trying to capture a feeling that was missing for a long time. I think that happens with The Last Jedi when you are trying to get something like a new perspective on power being protection rather than offensive. And I think it fell apart with The Rise of Skywalker, because like, yeah, there's some neat, like deep lore Star Wars stuff with that finale, but like it was an Indiana Jones movie for the first 2/3 of it. So like, I don't know if you're believing in your Star Wars if you're making it a different franchise feeling the entire time, you know? So it's this thing where I'm both excited and like frustrated that this is one of 2 seasons only. But like, yeah, I think coming into this series, I was excited, but a little bit pulled back from the original announcement excitement, because it's been a little like all over the place since that announcement was made. So yeah. Now let's get into the nitty gritty. What's the thing about this show that like really hit for you the hardest? Was it plot wise, or was it character stuff, or was it, because for me it was character stuff for sure.
It's 100% character for me. Obviously we knew a little bit about Andor going into it, just from the few lines that he sort of calls back to in Rogue One of like, I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old, sort of thing. And it was so fascinating to see how that actually transpired and how his viewpoint has changed since being a young boy to where we are now at the end of the first series.
To a young 42-year-old.
Well, to a young 42-year-old, yes. But I just, it is the character stuff for me that absolutely sells it, because it's that where the story is taking place the most, not the flashy effects, space wizards. It's these people just trying to survive, essentially, under an oppressive regime, and that's the story at the heart of it. And the character stuff inside that was just phenomenal. I mean, jumping ahead a few episodes, but Andy Serkis's speech.
There are so many monologues in this show that are phenomenal, and like he's got one, the Luthen one and the Marfa one at the end is like, blow me away.
So well written, like, and just the look of like pure rage in Andy Serkis's face as well when he's delivering that monologue is nothing short of chilling, quite frankly.
Yeah.
It's like he was staring into my soul. And the same for the Luthen one. That was just almost brutal in his delivery, but so simple at the same time. It didn't need to be like grandizing. It didn't need to be, ham-fisted. It was just, it cut straight to the point, with no fluff, and it was just perfect. But that Marva one at the end, shed a tear. It got me. Yeah. It was fantastic. I think the writers are just, they've stepped it up a notch. If you want to look at it in comparison to things like Boba Fett and Mando, and obviously Mando was, everybody loves Mando. It's great. Kenobi had some great writing. Obviously, the execution was, your results may vary. Boba Fett, same again. But I think, you look at it in comparison to all those and it just blows them all out of the water, quite frankly. Like, it's just, there's so much depth there. There's so much depth there in terms of the characters, but, in terms of the Star Wars universe and, our own real life history, quite frankly. Like, I just think it's quite phenomenal that all of that has come about in a Star Wars show at the same time. And has even, pulled people into it who aren't necessarily Star Wars fans, have been impressed by, this really solid sci-fi thriller that, like I say, isn't just about space wizards and, battles between good and evil. It's, an entire sort of people oppressed by this regime. And I think it's something that in our current society, without, pointing the finger, is become,
oh, you don't have to,
even more relevant. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, we all know. I think it's hit at a right time, especially, and it's so effective. Effective.
Well, and it's like, you speak of those like notes of reflection on reality, and it's just like, even to the point where there's like the stuff on Ferrix starts because it's a contracted police department that's overreaching. Like, it's a corporate authority, like, with a boot to the neck of people, which, that is that's happening here in America.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, even if it all comes full circle by the end of it, realistically, it comes back to Ferrix. And the moment that stood out to me, aside from Marva's speech, is the moment where they're like just charging down the street at the Imperials, who are stood there with riot shields, all in black. And I was like, well, we've seen that before on CNN, BBC News, etc., etc. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, this is when it becomes real for a lot of people, and it becomes relevant for a lot of people. But in a way that doesn't feel like it's, this isn't The Boys. They're not riffing on it.
Right. Yeah.
It was powerful.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying with like the, like, I don't want everything to be Andor, but I want everything to believe in itself the way it does. But like, I do think that, like, for that discussion, I appreciate that, like, this is a look into a reality version of what's going on. So we're getting a more deliberate, like almost more literal take on morality of good and evil. Whereas, you know, with the Skywalker saga stuff, like it is a more painterly, a more mythos version of a thing. So everything is grandiose. So you're simplifying all of the notes and messages that you're going with. Like good and evil is literally just the good guys and bad guys, right? Like there's not as much of that middle ground of like, you know, to get some good done, sometimes you got to get dirty. And that's what we're getting with this. And I appreciate that we have that side of things. Like we got it with Rogue One, but not to this extent. Like this allows us to explore this side of the galaxy way more intently than a Rogue One will, because it's obviously like you got to condense for a movie and you can expand for a TV show. So like, I'm really, really loving that we're able to now really get these multiple sides of Star Wars, because like we always kind of got it, but not like this. Like we would have different eras with like comics and games and, you know, Knights of the Old Republic, but like that's just another Gilded Age that we've seen a Gilded Age in before. So it's like this gives us that like perspective of what's happening to the peons while everything else is going on. And I think it's handled tremendously well. And like Tony Gilroy, like I almost said I have a personal connection to Tony Gilroy. I do not have a personal connection to Tony Gilroy. My cousin produced Michael Clayton. And so the only reason I was aware of Tony Gilroy is because of that connection. And so I, without knowing what the movie was, went in to see Michael Clayton because I was like, oh, I want to buy a ticket and support my cousin. And then it blew me away. And so like having that sort of tone, like tonally, this fits with those kinds of movies and forms of entertainment that he has had a touch on, where it's like the Star Wars is just the terminology in this, where it's like everything else is like, no, this is just a Tony Gilroy project, and that rules. Like it rules so much to like be able to look at something that I love with a skin on it, but also if I took that skin away, I could just still love it, because like at the core, it's a thing made by somebody that I know I appreciate the way that they make stuff. And it's like, dude, it just worked that way.
Yeah. I think the best like sci-fi works best. Well, it always works best when you tell a very human story in, like you say, a skin.
Yeah.
And you can take that skin away and it still works. It's like there's no element of Andor where if you took the Star Wars out of it, it would fall apart. Do you know what I mean? It would all work the same if you put it on Earth, if you put it in wherever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, sure, some of the situational stuff might need reworking, but you have the same beats, the same story elements.
Yeah, they may not be able to jump planet to planet, but
you know. yeah. Do you know what I mean? It would still work, and it would still work just as well. Like, you know, Star Wars isn't the thing that's propping it up. It's just, you know, it is this revolutionary tale. Oh, and there's stormtroopers. Yeah. So I think that says a lot about it. The fact that it would work regardless.
Yeah, and I like to go back to like character stuff. I don't know the last time I watched a show where I gave a shit about like every character on the show. Like even obviously there's characters who make a huge impact. There are main characters or side characters. There are minor characters, but even the minor characters have an arc that is completed. Like on
Ferrix, for example.
Exactly.
In the very first episode, you see the boy working in the shop with his dad, the one that Bix goes to. And then you fast forward, 11 episodes, and that boy is building a bomb to throw at the Imperials because of what they've done to his father, to his home. Like, even talking about it now, I have goosebumps. Do you know what I mean? It's like everything is paid off. Like, I couldn't tell you that boy's name, but I can tell you what it means to him as to what he did and why he did it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's phenomenal.
I was going to do a very similar thing, but even more minor, which is in the first episode, Cassian is confronted by somebody saying, "Hey, you owe money." And it comes back in the finale. That's the dude's gone the whole series, and it comes back in the finale. He sells out Andor, and but what I love about that is, like, yes, he sells out Andor in the finale, but in the moments during Marva's speech, you see him go from like the guy collecting personal debt to like a final regret before he's gone. And like that trajectory of character is like, that was just a throwaway character in the first episode. You didn't have to do that, but you still sold it, and they sold it so well. It's just like, if you can do that for the minor characters, like, yeah, of course the major characters are going to be like super impactful.
It's the same again. The guy in the first episode or it might be the second, who Andor's trying to buy. The first 3
episodes we are going to just say is one episode. Yeah.
He's trying to buy passage off to another planet or something. He's like, oh yeah, you have to bring me 700 credits or whatever. He's the guy that gets shot in the final episode, who the camera just holds on his face as he's lying face down in the dirt. And it's like, you've gone from a guy who's just being, a stick in the mud and just trying to do his job. Yeah,
he's like
as well as
he was kind of like comedic relief in that moment, and it's
to a full-blown revolutionary who dies for the cause.
And in the finale, in that moment when it just holds on his face when he's on the ground, the way that they cut to B2 makes it seem like they're facing one another.
Yeah,
and that is hard. Like, that's rough. Because B2, like, we didn't even talk about B2 at all yet.
Sorry for B2.
B2 is an all-time droid. Immediately.
I would die for B2.
Yeah. And it's like, we've seen characters that are droids that, like, portray different personality types and stuff. And we've seen anxiety portrayed through droids before. Like, we've seen R2 and BB-8 and stuff, but like B2 is the anxiety droid, like that, and that I think is why that character is so immediately connected as well, because like it's a cool design, the way that, like, it's a cool and overly simple design, but the way he's animated and works around is the sort of neat, like, oh, he looks cool, because he's just a mini fridge otherwise. But the fact that, like, they went with a little bit of the HAL, like the red eye, which gives you a familiarity in a way, to at least connect in that, like, oh, when it does a close up on his eye, like, I have felt like I've seen this before. But like, to convey that, like, when the best droid stuff is always like when we see them care, right? Because they're not supposed to be human characters. The good guys see them as human characters, as people, and the the bad guys typically don't. They see them as tools. So that's one of those things where I'm like, every time they go hard into conveying that, like, they care about who's around them, and they care just as much as anybody else, any living being. Like, that's the stuff that's always going to work the best. Like, even like Mr. Bones in the Aftermath trilogy, like, just this out of this mind, like, a little bit of the K2 sort of like rewriting the code aspect, but like just gone so much further that there's a ton of personality there, but like, in that craziness of that character, there's still, like, he gives a shit about Snap. Like, so every time that happens, that's when the most memorable stuff comes out, and you stop referring to them as, like, whatever, like, their name, like their not name, their like serial number is, and you start saying R2. You start saying, like, the shortened nickname version of it because they're personified a little bit more. And I think B2 is one of the best portrayals of that in this franchise now. And it's like, when we I don't like to use the like Mount Rushmore like metaphor because that is a terrible landmark. But like, you know, we have sort of like, obviously like C-3PO and R2 are up there. I would say BB-8 is up there now. K2SO is up there now. I would put like B2 up there at this point. It's the character has such an impact, and it's like a French bulldog almost, where it's just like the shaky worry of like when people aren't around and worrying about if they're okay and stuff like that. It's a very interesting take that they went on, because there's always like with the astromechs there is that little bit of like they treat him like a dog in the good way, that they treat him like a dog, and they give them sort of that little bit of personality and sort of interaction, and this is just like, it is one of the best versions of that. And it's like, I don't know how they're coming out with the best version of a lot of things in this franchise with this show. Like, you would usually say like, oh, they did this one thing like really well and maybe better than the other stuff. They did a lot of things in the show probably better than a lot of stuff in this franchise, which is wild.
Yeah, considering how big Star Wars really is, do you know what I mean? Yeah. I completely agree. Like, B2 is just adorable, and as I said a minute ago, I'd die for B2. You know, it's after Marvin's death, I honestly I felt so sorry for him.
Yeah.
Because he was just like, I want to stay, don't want to leave. And
what's the name of that famous dog in Japan, where it's like he just stayed at the train station? It's the Futurama thing.
Yeah.
It's that.
But I can't remember the guy's name. He's a British actor, obviously. It's Star Wars. But he's like,
Cassian's sort of like half brother almost.
Yeah,
Brasso.
Yeah, and he's like, I'll stay one more night.
Yeah, Brasso.
And I was just like, oh,
Brasso.
That was.
Before we started, I was going through characters, and I'm like, I can't pick a favorite character. I'm trying to like whittle it down even, and it's hard. And Brasso is up there, even though he's minimal in the show, I would say, like in terms of the supporting cast, right? He's not a main supporting cast member, but he's like almost there. But like he's a good guy. He's like the warm-hearted big brother throughout the series for Cassian. And
yeah,
then finally, like when everybody wakes up in the finale, like he's not the gentle giant anymore. He's the first one to throw a kick. He's the first one to attack. And it's like,
yeah,
it's so nuts. But like, yeah, it's the characters in this show. Like, I don't know how they managed to make every one of them as compelling as they are, because like there's the obvious characters that like should have an impact, right? There's the Nemec kind of character where it's just like, yeah, he's the one that's supposed to like kick us into gear, right? So but he's not just an altruist, which is cool. Like he's not just like believe in the cause, right? He's like an altruist scholar. So he's studying like sort of the biology of how the rebellion is organically popping up everywhere. And just to see how that's conveyed through his eyes of not just like, you know, the way the news might cover it as like this sect is blowing something up and this sect is blowing something up. He's like, no, these are little fires that are popping up because everything underneath is heated. So like the hot spots are gonna start coming alive. And it's like, to go that deep into a character when they could have just been like, oh no, you know, I believe in this cause and that's why we're doing it. Like, it's wild that they were able to convey that with so many different aspects. Yeah. There's like 94 characters in this show. They're all great. How is that possible?
even the villains, I was surprised at how well they were written. I was just expecting your typical frog marching imperial bad guys, and Denise Goff's Dedra, I was very impressed with just how
Dedra and Cyril are both phenomenal.
Yeah, just with how menacing she was, but the desperation that's built into her that is just sort of slowly kind of creeps out every now and then when you see her talking on a hologram or trying to speak to the other ISB agents and stuff, or trying to one up them. I was like, she's clearly so invested in this. It's the whole thing. I can't, again, this is another character that I can't remember the name of, but the other ISB agent that she sort of butts heads with.
Yep.
Her desperation to stay on top of him.
The competition for the promotion, basically.
Yeah, that was captivating in itself. I would have quite happily spent an entire episode just with the ISB, because that whole setup was fascinating.
And what's interesting
the entire
about
room
that,
was it gave me Doctor Strangelove vibes.
Yep. Absolutely.
It was that whole group discussion. It was just excellent.
Something really interesting about that. First of all, this is just a side thing really quickly. I don't think we're going to have to go into this character too much, but the guy that was the mole, before we got a name and stuff for him, I was like, what if that's Hux's dad? It could have been.
Stop it.
But before we got that reveal of the name, that would have just seeing the character, it would have made sense. But with Dedra's stuff, I found it really interesting that they sort of played into the twist that people perceived, which was in the first couple of episodes when she's first getting introduced. You almost want to believe that she's a mole for the rebellion. And then they were like, no, she's just having to assert herself in a certain way because she wants to further herself. And she's actually real bad. But I think
there's an element as well is that she's working in a very male-dominated environment, so she has to constantly prove herself to show that she's capable of this job and of this position and of the respect as well, because clearly some of the people in that room don't respect her as much as they should.
Right.
And she's fighting for that, which is a captivating story in its own right in the frame of Star Wars. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's one of those things where we were saying before where it's how many mirrors to reality can they squeeze in here and not lose the excellence that they put into it? It's just another one of those crazy things, but it's we really shouldn't care about the weird romance story of Dedra and Cyril.
I'm sorry, but in the finale, I was like, are they going to kiss? Are they going?
It's weird that we feel that way.
Especially because essentially she's right. He was sort of stalking her. Do you know what I mean? That was questionable. That was questionable behavior.
And you're also rooting for two bad people. It's weird. But it's such a crazy thing because Cyril, through the whole episode, I really liked the I keep saying it's a mirror to reality, but in this case there's a mirror of not a mirror but a reflection, because it's kind of the opposite, where Cyril is Cassian through the story, right? Where Cassian is a dangerously capable person who is in over their head because of the circumstances, whereas Cyril is a dangerously incapable person who is in places of power because of being a sycophant and doing the wrong thing, promotion through failure, essentially. So it's really this interesting kind of juxtaposition to see them sort of doing similar story arcs with who they are and where they want to be, or where they are going, and how one is reluctant and being pulled in, and one is desperate for something and like essentially keeps getting squashed down, which is like felt good. That doesn't actually really happen in real life.
I kind of expected a bit more of a reveal around Cyril. Because they name dropped Uncle Harlow a few times, I was like, is this somebody that we should know about? And part of me wanted it to be Luthen, because I was like, that would have been a really interesting
and we still
connection.
Don't have a reveal of connection for him, even though they've kind of like alluded to it with like Vel and stuff. So it's yeah. So I was a bit like, there's definitely a way that they could have tied that together. I don't think that'll happen now. Not with season 2 already in the works. It's kind of past that point now. But I just thought it would have been quite interesting to see who Uncle Harlow was. Yeah, like that is. I mean, you have to assume at this point, since it's not like a focus, it's some middle management, like who nobody gives a shit kind of person.
It's somebody else sat in a pod pressing buttons. That's
but that's like
it.
That's the funny thing is like. Cyril's mom going out of her way to like really prop up the importance of the uncle because he has this big important job. It's like, nah, he's like Michael Scott. Like he just happens to have like he's the head of this branch of this tiny little thing. Like it's not that important. I did love like with Cyril's stuff though, like how many times we got a pass the salt ending to an episode where it's just him being like in his shitty life. Like, which is funny because like I think a lot of people were sort of like, well, that wasn't a satisfying ending because it's just him, it's just a guy being kicked. But it's like sometimes that's satisfying to see like a not good person just get kicked at the end of an episode. And it's
just
particularly
eating cereal at a table.
Yeah, but particularly like that zoom out when he's first sitting in his little like circle desk thing. Like it's so absolutely wonderful to see somebody that is like, no, I'm special. Just be like, you zoom out and just see like, nah, dude, you're just a pixel. Like you're just like this little tiny part of the image, and it's like, oh yeah. But yeah, we keep talking about like the side characters and stuff, but like Luthen and Mon Mothma,
what dynamic,
unbelievable in this show.
Like again, going back to the whole it works without Star Wars. All of their conversations just are dynamite, every single one of them, and the use of just tension through like code and just like weighted sentences. Just you feel it. You're like, oh god, this is just like
the roller coaster moment.
Edge.
It's the you're at the peak and you're lifting out of the seat and your stomach clenches kind of stuff. Like the fact that they can get that out of silence is phenomenal.
And it's like, obviously Luthen's shop is just like, it's the Easter egg shop of antiquities. But like I didn't even bother to look because I was just too focused on those two people.
I let articles handle that.
Bringing to this. Yeah, I just sort of was like, oh, there's things in it, I'll rewatch it later on. But I couldn't take my focus away from them long enough because they were just almost like just fighting with words, even though they're on the same side.
Yeah.
Over just like ridiculous things. And it was just, I think it was quite a good example of like how, in terms of the rebellion, that like bureaucracy gets in the way of that as well, because there's so many layers that Mon has to fight through to actually do what she wants to do and be effective while slipping under the radar. It's just their whole like kind of pseudo conflict thing was just, it was just electric. And I was just like, Stellan Skarsgård in Star Wars, yes, like just perfect. And like he's probably gonna die in season 2, let's be real.
Yeah.
I don't want him to.
He had too many good moments in season 1 to like not go that route. Yeah. Like that last escape from the tractor beam. Like you can't have that and not have comeuppance from it. Like you have to.
100%. 100%.
But yeah, like
every scene in those shops was just
like
fantastic.
The way that we're finally seeing the levels of desperation for Mon Mothma, where we're seeing she's financially strained. She is strained at home because her husband is the worst husband.
He is the worst person in the world.
Fucking terrible. And like turning their daughter against her. Like that is rough.
I felt so sorry for it when Vel turns up at their apartment,
that
and
ice
she's
cold
like,
look over the shoulder.
It's like that hurt.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I was like, Christ. But it was so satisfying realizing what she was doing in the final episode when she was baiting her husband about the gambling, and I was like, oh yes. Fantastic. Like she's just absolutely stick it to him. That was
regaining
brilliant.
the power dynamic in that moment. And it's like, yes, okay.
So, and covering her own tracks at the same time.
Yeah,
like
and
just
season 2 is where we're actually going to see, I think, her more, like, we get her connecting with Luthen, but we don't get her like in a rebellion organization sense thing. And I think with like, it's a 5-year gap, I think, in there between season 1 and season 2. So
I think it's a year.
Oh, it's only a year.
I read earlier that it's a year. Yeah.
Oh, maybe it's a 5-year gap from the series to Andor is what it was.
It's every 3 episodes is about a year, so it's probably a 5-year gap from the start of Andor to the start of season 2. I think, roughly. But there's going to have to come a point where she transitions from being a senator to being the leader of a rebellion. She's going to have to make that move.
She's not going to be able to jump back and forth as
no. So I think season 2 is going to involve that to some degree. And oh god, I hope somebody shoots her husband in the face, because he's just the most irritating person on the planet, or on Coruscant at least.
Well, it's that thing.
I did like the little Canto bite nod.
Yeah, that was nice. But like, you see the like. I mean, I'm assuming it's similar over there with this, but like, growing up in like Massachusetts, in a small town where a lot of people don't leave, and they marry young, and they like never, the only time they go into Boston is to go see a Red Sox game. They don't actually experience the culture of a city or anything. You see that because of the cultural implications of like, they married very young, and you see like, he is a small town guy that happens to be pulled into the big city at a point when he's already set in his ways of like just being a douche. And so it's interesting to see, like, again, that's that reflection of reality where it's like, yeah, I have seen that many times. Working at bars in like the greater Boston and Cambridge area, I saw that a fair deal. And had to kick people out of those bars. So yeah, it's
coming from a small town in North Lincolnshire, yes,
okay.
Can completely relate.
Universal themes.
Universal themes, indeed. He's just such a dick. I just hate him. He's like, even down to his stupid little man bun, I just hate him so much. But does that not say a lot about the writing and the performance that we feel so strongly about him, even though he's peppered throughout the series? He's not got a main arc. He's not really got much to do aside from annoy Mon and be a thorn in her side. And
be a risk, basically.
Yeah, and be a liability. And I just thought it was so satisfying after being annoyed for 12 episodes by him, that she pinned all of her troubles on him and she found a way to sort of cover it up. I was like, oh, that was just like, so just the comeuppance was great.
Especially knowing that like, he's actually telling the truth. Doesn't matter, dude.
More
I still want to see you rot. It's very silly and like to like really focus on this one character, but like this character could have just been like one of those you again, but like no, the whole series we legitimately are just like, no, fuck you, dude. Like, we hate you to your core.
He has no redeemable qualities at all.
No.
Like even his relationship with his daughter, he's using that as a weapon against Mon. Do you know what I mean? He's not being nice to her for the sake of being nice to her. He's being nice to her and giving her nice things because he knows it pisses his wife off.
And not even
like,
just his wife. The shit that he says to Vel when they're all sitting at the table.
Oh God, no! Just a deplorable human being.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the greatest villains in Star Wars history. A husband
is a husband who gambles.
Yeah. And doesn't even gamble anymore.
Doesn't even gamble anymore. Yeah. Christ, honestly, I just hated him.
Yeah. Ugh. The way that they handled relationships in this, I think, is really interesting because, like, you have your, like, Cassian and Bix in the history stuff where they are just still friends with one another and have similar bonds with one another over, you know, beliefs and whatnot. And then you have Cinta and Vel, which is not as, like, it's pretty explicit that, like, yes, they care for one another romantically, but, like, not literal it's not as in your face as like you never see them have that moment of like desperate embrace sort of, and
I think there's more chemistry
that would have been
between...
a little rewarding to actually like have just one moment of that.
I think there's more romantic chemistry, like in the literal like embracing sense, between Cyril and Dedra, quite frankly, than between those two, which I think is a bit of a shame, especially considering they spent all that time on Aldani together. You just needed a little something here and there, just to sort of sell that a little bit more. Obviously, like you say, it's very explicit that they're a couple, they are a thing, but
it's only in dialogue. It's just is the problem.
Yeah. I think maybe it's a sign.
Disney.
Damn it, Chapek. Oh, wait, Iger.
Bob Iger, fix this. Let him smooch. Release a new cut.
Stop it.
I was seeing how long that took. Listen, the smooch cut is, I think most people will be on board with.
Yeah, well, yes. But I think maybe it's a sign that, you know, their fight has sort of twisted them and has warped their relationship a little bit, but that is still no excuse for the fact that they could have been more of a couple. And, you know, if there's one thing that Star Wars does need, I think it is a little bit more of representation. And while there's a much more diverse cast, or in the last few years, there's been much more diversity in casting in general across various projects, I think in terms of, you know, LGBTQ plus relationships and stuff, they just needs to be a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that feels like a missed opportunity. That being said, like, again, the writing for those arcs is still phenomenal.
Yeah. We need a little less of like the person in the background in The Rise of Skywalker and a little bit more of like
Jesus.
More of this, but just like a little more overt. That's all. We like, don't make it just dialogue. Make it show that they like care about each other with body language, and that's sort of.
And there's ways of doing that that doesn't, you know, it's not shoehorned in. It's not like, you know, rubbing it in people's faces as
a touch on the shoulder goes a long way, even where it's
the
just
common
like,
complaint seems to be.
Yeah,
but yeah, agreed. So, but again, like the actress who plays Vel was just, her intensity was great. She was just like from the get go, amazing.
One of the faceless people from Game of Thrones, right? Is that
she's the waif?
Yeah,
is it the waif? I think that's what she was called.
Feels bad to say, but yeah, I think that's what she was called.
She was. That genuinely was what she was called. She's the one that like tortures Arya a bit and like beats her up and whatnot.
The titles of people in the Game of Thrones, it doesn't feel good to say them. A lot
that wasn't my description of her in Game of Thrones. Just like to point that out.
But yeah, I do like. Overall, I think everything about this show is like running on all cylinders. I do think a couple of things, like we said, the pacing in those first couple episodes, maybe a little bit of, I don't know. I don't know if this would be better or worse, but like, or to keep it as a if you know kind of thing with references and whatnot. But like, for me, it worked really, really well with the prison stuff where they were like, this is THX 1138. Like, this is, so for me, like, that really works super, super hard. I wonder if those, like, the style choices for the prison would work for somebody without that sort of ingrained in them, where they're like other than the fact that it's not a like 1970s policeman with a chrome face, like it's not that literal, but like it's really going hard on the references to that, and I wonder if it hits for people who aren't as like informed with that.
I think it does. For me, the first thing I actually thought of was not THX, was actually The Island with Scarlett Johansson and Ewan McGregor, funnily enough.
Interesting.
Because their whole setup was kind of not
everyone's favorite Michael
sense,
Bay movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Michael Bay, right?
I think it is Michael Bay. It's not great, but I think it's better than people make out. It's fine, yeah.
It's better than most of the Transformers movies. I will say that.
Oh, it's better than like 90% of the Transformers movies. But like their whole setup was very similar, and that's kind of, the old stark white outfits, the routine of doing the same job every day,
well, it's kind of
with no hope of release. It's kind
of a callback to The Prisoner, right? Like the old school.
Yeah.
So we didn't see a giant orb floating by, but that's
no.
But yeah, like I think
but
all
then
of
you
that
didn't need it.
play.
You didn't need a floating orb. You had that like horrible mechanical voice.
Yeah.
That basically the whole prison is a panopticon and just like has everybody watched at all times.
Yeah, and that's how heavy those references to like THX 1138 is too, where it's just like they're doing the same thing where they're modulating the voice that's overheard on it. They're like it's just so like for me being like the dweeby, not even Star Wars kid, but like George Lucas kid growing up, and like finally as like a young adult when I finally saw THX 1138, and I was like, damn, this dude wasn't always just like the fun for everybody kind of dude. To see that come into play was really just it's one of those things where it's like, you don't have to nod back to like Lucas's very specific work. You Star Wars can move forward without having to do that, but like with stuff like this, I think is how it works best to do it, and not just like live with the Skywalkers constantly. And like it doesn't have to be the literal George Lucas stuff. It can be the like nods to his old work and like stuff that isn't even Star Wars, So
yeah. I thought this isn't my comparison. I have only seen pictures, but I did think the comparison to the prison to the Galactic Cruiser was just hilarious.
Yeah, it's granted it's also, it looks like the inside of the clean Millennium Falcon a little bit too, but like the fact that the publicity lately was on the Star Cruiser, like it's the
not great.
It's the alcoves particularly where like there's a bed in the wall, and I think that's like that's a thing that's in Star Wars in general, but like I think the fact that like over the last couple of years it's just been talked about, and then you have like the absurd price to stay there. Like it is very silly to have that like accidental like duality of those two things. Where it's like a essentially for-profit prison because they're getting work labor out of it with their very expensive hotel. Which hotel,
there is
it's an experience. It's an experience, but like it's it's an immersive
experience for like however many days
you just happen
stay there.
to don't leave port ever. But yeah, it's
Yeah. I think there's something to be said that about obviously the show's main theme about rebellion and hope, of course. And about standing up to, such a big regime and such a massive organization that occasionally, although in its entirety it is, it's really powerful and it's incredibly moving, I think it's funny that it comes from Disney.
There's an irony to it. Yeah.
It's essentially an entertainment monopoly at this point. Yeah. And
especially over the last few years with like Chapek in charge, it became a lot more cold. Like,
yes,
you kind of don't think about it as much when they're outputting, things that people care about with in terms of like keeping employees happy and keeping the customers happy and not just like drilling them for every penny. And it's this weird thing where we like, yes, I'm clearly like Disney guy, like there's stuff everywhere, but I still try to keep that principle of like, it's the stuff that I love and the people that make it as opposed to the corporation side of it. And it was hard for those couple of years with Chapek to ignore. That was so front facing that they were just a cold boardroom with a suit that was just like, we're taking you for everything you got. At least there's something in the era before him and hopefully moving forward where we'll be like, you know what? Like the people that are literally making the thing care, and the people at top actually seem at least that they care, instead of just being like business, always new profits and like whatever. Take Andor is not performing as well as they would want, one would assume. It's performing okay, but like it's Star Wars. Like it's one of the big things that they've invested in over the last decade. I hope that currently they take the response to this show from the people who are actually invested in it and move forward with that deliberate kind of decision making that's like, no, we need to go for the people that we know will give a shit. And if we get some new people on board, that's good, but we don't have to expect the moon.
Yeah, what I would say is that I hope they find a good balance between this and the obvious outpouring of love for Mandalorian and related characters. And they don't go too heavy on your Grogu, your Din Djarin. I think there needs to be a good balance between what Star Wars is and what it can be.
Yeah.
And, Andor proves that, again, as we've said 3 or 4 times, like it can be something that's a very real story in a fantastical setting. And that's all I want from them, is just tell great stories in this world, but that everybody can relate to. Do you know what I mean? And I kind of hope that that's where we go in the next few years. Whether or not that pans out is, that remains to be seen. I still want the Rian Johnson trilogy. Still want it.
It's seeming, he keeps reassuring people that it's still kind of happening, but like,
okay, Ryan,
we'll see. I desperately want it to, and you never know, maybe, but
maybe
it seems less likely right now, unfortunately. But we'll see with all the shakeups going on how it actually like affects things. But yeah, I think that's probably a good place to leave off, even though we didn't even talk about like how great they handled the like state of Saw Gerrera and how he's growing even more paranoid. Like that scene between him and Luthen, fantastic.
Yeah.
But
and 2 tubes.
Yeah.
Yes. Loved him coming back. That was great.
Absolutely. There, we touched on it. We didn't leave it out. Perfect.
All right. There we go.
Thanks again for coming on, Eammon. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Eammon Jacobs, while Twitter is still a thing. Basically, it is my name on pretty much every platform that you can find me. Instagram, Hive, the usual. I am no longer a freelancer. The usual Hive, that social media platform that took off in the last week. You can find my work at Insider, which is where I am full time now. I'm no longer a freelancer, which is a very weird thing to say.
And it wasn't one of your stories, but I made a graphic at my job for a thing that was via Insider. So yeah.
It's a legit company. It's a legit job, I promise. Yeah. And thanks for having me on, as always.
Yeah, of course. I'll see you again when Star Wars comes back. I'm completely off the calendar and can't remember what it is next. But
it'll be Bad Batch in January.
Perfect.
And then Mando season 3 in February, I believe.
That is
and then
some quick turnover between those two.
I think that pinch of salt. It could be March. And then Andor season 2 unfortunately isn't arriving until 2024.
Yeah,
that's
a bummer.
Yeah,
but it is what it is. There's plenty of other stuff to watch.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on, and until next time.